Most of us could probably relate to making difficult decisions in business or life. The challenge, however, in making a difficult decision is that you have a great deal of what Leon Festinger calls cognitive dissonance. See, in the beginning, we open our minds to lots of different alternatives, all which look good in some ways and bad in others. Now, struggling with several various options creates dissonance because many of the choices are mutually exclusive. Most of us actually hate cognitive dissonance. As a result, we tend to rationalize our choice, defend our decisions, and then find reasons to denigrate alternatives. The most common problem, due to this justification process, is that it may take you a long time to recognize that you made a poor decision. It happens in all aspects of life, at home, at work, raising kids, or even buying cars. Once you decide, you find yourself defending the decision, and it's difficult to accept the fact that this may have been a wrong decision. Now, in the workplace, decisions can be a building block of a successful career, or they can be the reason for failure. Some people try to skip the possibility of failure by avoiding making difficult decisions, but that's not helpful either. In fact, research supports the idea that having the ability to make good decisions and be decisive is a critical element of leadership success. That's what we'll be exploring today. Hello and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast brought to you by Sproutword.com. I'm Renee Coach and our guest today is Lyn Christian. Lyn, you have been coaching for, I think, well over 30 years. You're a master certified coach, best-selling author, renowned speaker, and the founder of Soul Salt. In fact, you've got a book out by that name as well.
Right.
Also, we're the director of innovation, if I understand this correctly, at Franklin Covey, and an ambassador at the World Association for Business Coaches. Now, the book, I believe, dives into how people can master their journey of growth, and we'll dive into that in a bit. But I'm curious, given your role at Franklin Covey, was there a point where you realized that coaching was this journey that you needed to travel on? And if so, I'm curious to hear what that particular event or incident was.
So I started out as an educator and then made a transition to work for Franklin Covey in their innovation center as a writer and developer of content. And the catalyst for getting me to Franklin Covey from academics was I visited with a business coach and asked her if she was going to make a change from academics to business, how would she do that? And she took me on. She was my first exposure to coaching. And I fell in love with her lifestyle. When I met with her, I was in a home office. She had a cup of tea in her hand. She had her hiking boots on. She'd just come down off the mountains. And I thought, as we talked and I could see what her work was, I thought, what a lovely way to live. So I tucked that away. And after I got hired at Franklin Covey and started writing and developing content for them, I took out some savings and started coach training as a finishing school for me as an adult, because I asked her where she learned some of the things that we worked on, and she told me from coach training. And I wanted to have that kind of repertoire of skills and that kind of, I'm on a path of personal development. So I wanted that. I studied it. I never thought I would be a coach. I just thought I would use this as a self-study. And of course, you need to have some clients. And so I got clients. I turned out to be pretty good at it. Meanwhile, my day job was at Franklin Covey, and I moved from writer and developer to project manager. Then I was asked to be the associate director over a project management innovation center. And then Franklin Covey Coaching came to me and asked if I would be their director of innovation over the Franklin Covey Coaching division.
Wow.
So that was how I got into it. And lo and behold, I was good at it. I enjoyed it. And so that's what stuck. Yes, I have the personal development, but I did it by accident.
Excellent. And you're certainly very good at it. In fact, I believe you're a trusted advisor to companies such as Procter & Gamble, the Paul Mitchell School, and Zavico, just to mention a few. But I'm also curious, as you've been on this journey of personal development and discovery, what would you say would be your personal area of strength?
Yeah. Thank you for asking that, because most of us, after we've coached for a while, we find a niche or a specialty. And so mine is in personal innovation in 3 areas: being a leader who's trying to go to the next level of personal leadership using deep identity and personal style as the guide. The next one would be career reinvention or personal reinvention, where you're diving in and finding out who you are and what you can do with it. And then the other one is just basic entrepreneurship, when you decide you're finished with corporations, you're finished with the bots. How do you reinvent? And so the common thread is this reinvention of identity across the board and in those three areas.
I'm curious, what would you say is something that businesses should know in that area of strength, but don't?
What businesses should know about their area of strength, but don't?
No, your area of strength, but don't.
What they should know, but they don't?
No.
Yes. I think one of the big things is we've had the strength psychology from Gallup and from individuals like Marcus Buckingham who have told us about strength-based performance. And I think that went a long distance in telling us, don't spend all your time on weaknesses, leverage your strengths, but mitigate your weaknesses. But what I bring out in my book is there's something in the middle that we're often not warned about. And those are pseudo strengths. It's something that I've coined in my book, a term I've coined in my book. Pseudo strengths are what they sound like. We're good at them. They look like strengths to everybody around us, and they'll hand us work and say, you're better at this than I am. Please do it. But when we do it, it drains us. It doesn't make us happy. It doesn't leave us jazzed and excited. And we're not doing anything complete with little ease, which is the definition of a strength. In fact, it takes blood, sweat, and tears. So when you work from a pseudo strength, you're more prone to burnout, less engagement at work, less happiness, and the work quality goes down. So I think it's the coming out and saying, mitigate, manage against your weaknesses. You can't ignore those. Leverage your strengths. That's the way to catapult your work forward. But pay attention to pseudo strengths and make sure you have fewer hours at those. You're going to have to do some of those, but lessen the hours you spend there or pay a consequence.
Mm-hmm. But a very interesting term you've coined, the definition of that. I'm an introvert, and I'm curious, if you were to engage in an activity that deals with people, let's say, as an introvert, but leaves me somewhat fulfilled, but tired at the end of it simply because I am an introvert, would that make it a pseudo strength or a strength?
Oh, what a great question. I love the challenge. So let me ask a couple more questions and we'll find your answer. How's that? Because it may not be the same for everyone that's an introvert, right? So for you, when you finish, I hear you feel a little depleted. However, after you get some rest, would you like to go back and do that again?
Absolutely.
Okay, so there's an indicator. And then the other thing is, when you're with people, even though it wears you out, is there some ease and excellence at it?
Probably, given that others seem to want to get more of the same or reach out to me if they've had some benefit from our interactions.
Yeah. So then I would say probably then in this case, it is a strength and we need to handle it like we would a muscle, which is go ahead and exercise it and use it, but put away and let it have some rest and recovery so it's ready for the next time, and give yourself some bandwidth to return to you before you exercise that muscle again.
Brilliant. Now, I remember when we were talking earlier, we were talking about this idea that a lot of people feel stuck in their own journey of discovery and growth. And one of the key issues is fear. And perhaps no matter how you kind of phrase it, it boils down to perhaps not being good enough or being stuck. Now, I think as leaders, most of us try not to give that window into ourselves of being not good enough, being afraid or of potential outcomes.
Right.
For those of us who are leaders in organizations who need to portray strength and certainly this belief that we know where we're heading, irrespective of what might be happening around us or what people are saying around us, how do you help them unpack all of these fears that we've squished down or bottled up, if you will?
That's a great question. I hope I address it in an adequate fashion for you, because per leader, there could be a different approach. But let me just pull a generic one I'm thinking of with an executive in a tech company. The first thing is to start talking about it in your coaching with them and allow it to be a space that if they want to step into, they can be vulnerable, because we've all heard that adage, it's lonely at the top. And it is. There's a lot riding on those broad shoulders of those executives, no matter who they are. And so sometimes they do have one or two tight-knit confidants like a coach or a mentor where they can just be real. And so I think it's important that as coaches and as leaders, we seek out those who can partner with us so we can have that kind of vulnerability. Once we get that established, then we start talking with a language of emotions and assist the executive to get more comfortable using words to express what they're feeling and see if there are underlying needs. To say it's okay to be afraid and to figure out, okay, you must have a good reason that you're afraid. Because we all get afraid. And then if someone can work with us and facilitate us, we found that there are neurons that won't fire unless that other person outside of us is facilitating. And sometimes in those dialogues, a leader is able to look at their fears and figure out that the obstacle is the way, or figure out that the fear is much smaller than they anticipated, or find out that fear is really hot and we need to deal with it. So let's get a mitigation strategy or a risk strategy. I think the key is bringing it out, putting it on the table, being vulnerable enough to talk about it. Let the leader have the space to be a human and to be seen. Because when they go out and lead, they may not show that much vulnerability. If they're a good leader, they do show some. There's a lot of transparency and vulnerability in good leadership, especially if you're a transformative leader. But I think that's where it starts, is in the relationship, creating a safe space and using language around what we're feeling.
You make some great points there. However, I'd like to come back to this idea of coaching, because from what I hear from most people, they go into coaching with the idea of growth, of finding strength, to building on their strengths. I don't hear too much being said about addressing fears and perhaps the I'll use a broad term, mental health issues surrounding fears, which I would think is very much a part of that journey as well.
Oh, it is. Yes.
And if so, should we be cognizant, not just cognizant of it, but also be seeking to find a coach who is willing to address these issues proactively, even if we may not recognize the
Yes.
seriousness of these fears?
Yeah, because I think it's the coaches. If you look at the ICF core competencies and our code of ethics within the ICF, and if you look at the best practices, the 50 thinkers, so many of those individuals, in our circles, we're talking about bringing the topic of mental health and emotional intelligence forward. And Daniel Goleman and Damasio did a great job in the 90s talking about EQ and why it's more important than IQ. I think that was groundwork for us to start talking about mental health today. So if you are an executive and your coach is not bringing that to the table, perhaps you might want to ask them to do that. Or you might look for that when you're hiring somebody who's going to be willing to talk about your emotional health. Now, as coaches, we're generally not trained as therapists unless you are a therapist who then became a coach, or vice versa. But there's enough of us who have studied neuroscience and human performance, and enough of the conversational intelligence studies as far as EQ, CIQ, to talk about how your emotional state influences your decision-making, your relationships, and also your ability to leverage the best that you can bring out in yourself.
I would see that as being pivotal. I'd like to come back to this idea of vulnerability.
Okay.
Leaders should share as they are perhaps a transformative leader, as you suggested. But before that, your book, Soul Salt, has a tagline, Your Personal Field Guide to Confidence, Purpose, and Fulfillment. Now, we talked about people being somewhat stuck in their journeys and hence looking for coaching to help them navigate past that. Is there a particular process or a framework that you guide people through? How does this work?
Yeah, so my book is basically a year's worth of life coaching with me in a book. And the idea is that the premise is inside of each of us is a deep identity that if we access these 8 areas of what I call the salt of your soul salt, you find pieces of yourself that reflect your best self, so you can bring that forward and allow it to evolve with you. So the idea is to read the field guide. It's not a typical book. When you finish that, you have done some work. You have done a deep dive. You've done reflection. You've been honest with yourself. You've recorded your answers, and you created a map that you can map and track your behaviors, your decisions, your actions against. And when you find out these pieces of the soul salt, it's validating, it's affirming pieces of you that were out there floating around and showing up in behaviors and at decision points, and you had no idea why they poked their head up and said, go this way or that way. You now have command and control over it. But it's a gentle relationship of populating the topography of your own guidance system. And then as you evolve and progress through life, you change it because it will evolve as you evolve. So the map is created for you to record the first time through and then to revisit, go through the exercises and see how it evolves with you so that you always have a pocket guide. Because my premise also is if we had been born with an owner's manual, we would all be different. If it's attached to our ankle when we come out of the birthing canal, we'd have great parenting, hopefully. But now we have to retrofit that, and that's what the field guide does.
Terrific. And what are the 8 areas that you look at?
So we work on your core values in a way, and a lot of people say, oh, I know my core values. I'm going to ask you to dig in a way that maybe you haven't dug before. Then we get into finding out your unique personal needs, because those are very much entrained with your values. And when I say personal need, I'm not talking food, water, shelter. You and I have personal needs that no other human being has. And if we don't know what they are, we run around with something starving or thirsty all of our lives. And that's not a great way to live. Then we work on the strengths where we talk about weaknesses. We talk about pseudo strengths. We talk about superpowers. We also talk about how you measure success metrics. We talk about finding purpose. We talk about how to be inspired. And then I have a possibility practice because there are the dreams and aspirations that float through us all the time. And sometimes we pay attention to them and sometimes we don't. But if we don't, we're missing some of the biggest parts of our lives that might be some of the most profound expressions of who we are. So that is, in a nutshell, the 8 main chapters that take you through finding the salt of your soul.
And I'm pretty sure that would be well worth digging into, especially in order to discover yourselves. But let's say we have found strengths and kind of direction in life as a leader, and we're looking to lead in this direction that we're taking others on within the organization. Obviously, being decisive, we've talked about, is a critical skill set. How do we balance that with other things like vulnerability, as we talked about? Because sometimes being decisive can also come across as being somewhat arrogant, insulated from other opinions or thoughts, which perhaps most of us do not want to, an impression that most of us do not want to create intentionally, but it may come across that to others. How do we balance that with this idea of being decisive, showing strength, yet being vulnerable enough to encourage and build trust with others?
I think there are a lot of elements that can contribute to that. And if I could just name a few, I think it behooves us to, as leaders, to always be learning. I think that helps us stay humble and current. I think it's important for us to understand what transparency is and to use that as a practice to tell the why behind the what, to share more than withhold. And I'd also feel you're hitting on something that I'm a big proponent of, and this is in my TEDx talk, of the leader hearing the language of their head, heart, and gut system, so that when they make a decision, they have an informed decision that uses possibly the best analysis from the neocortex, the best vision from the prefrontal cortex, the neurons in the heart and the gut. And they have this balanced approach to conviction, because win or lose, right or wrong, the leader has to make decisions, and then they have to execute, and they have to be nimble enough to pivot if that is not necessarily the right decision. And they have to be willing to stick with it if it is. And so I feel like when a leader is in touch with that inner guidance system of going, I feel it somatically. This is how I know this is my truth. I'm thinking it. I'm seeing it, emoting it, motivated to do it. Then they're running on all cylinders. Does that even translate? I know I'm geeking out in my own language.
It does. And we'll include a link to the TEDx talk as well, so people can dive deeper into it. But for those of us who relate to what you were saying, and they go, yeah, I certainly have looked at the data, the perspectives, and I know the kind of direction that we need to go through. I know in my heart that this is more or less the right way to proceed, but I still have butterflies in my stomach. Is that still alignment, or do we just attribute the butterfly's nervousness about the outcome, or is there more to how we should look at alignment?
Well, the butterflies could be there for many reasons, right? And again, that's why it's really helpful to have a mentor or a coach, somebody by your side to facilitate you to figure out. A lot of times, the butterflies, let's talk about the core competencies of the gut brain. The
Mhm.
enteric brain starts right here and goes to your back door. It's about motivation. It's about courage to to motivate yourself to move. It's about deep identity. So the butterflies could also be included in excitement about something because you're motivated about it. It could be a little bit of fear because you haven't done it before. It could be some trepidation because you know this is super important to your identity. So understanding what the butterflies are saying to you would help you understand the language that the gut's actually trying to convey to you.
And with this idea of learning that you talked about, I would assume that for most leaders, it's not just about gaining subject matter competence, expert knowledge, but also about investing in learning about neuroscience, psychology, and really bettering one's ability to understand and communicate with other people. Would that
Right.
be fair?
I think so. One of my mentors, the late Judith E. Glaser, taught me personally and cohorts of us who went through her conversational intelligence courses that the quality of any culture is dependent upon the quality of the relationships. And the quality of the relationships is dependent upon the quality of the conversations. So it all comes back to how we communicate with each other and when we communicate with each other about what we talk about.
Mhm. Okay. If conversational intelligence is such a key part, I haven't heard it mentioned very much in a lot of conversations. I've heard of empathy, listening, etc.,
Yes.
but not necessarily conversational intelligence. Is that somewhat different to the terms that I just used, or is there more to it?
Empathy, compassion, those kind of things, emotional intelligence, they all collide within conversation. And so conversational intelligence is actually a body of knowledge that Judith created. And you can find the book Conversational Intelligence. It's about building extraordinary trust. It's an amazing book. It's just one body of knowledge that talks about how our language, our words influence our neurochemistry. The things that you're saying or hearing, the actions that you're experiencing can throw you back into the primitive brain. It can cause cortisol, start stressing you out, or it can draw you out, pull you into the prefrontal cortex, have you drop into your heart at the same time in your gut. And now you're building trust with the other person and you have this cybernetic loop with them. And it's a dynamic that anybody who's studied emotional intelligence may have found CIQ, conversational intelligence, but they're all swirling around in the same pond of trying to help us with nonviolent communication and such, trying to help us to be better at listening, understanding, connecting, and then creating, co-creating together.
Very interesting. You have a 5-step process for building trust. Is that correct?
I don't have it, but yeah, Judith brought it forward in her work.
Right.
And I think it was actually trying to remember Demoko. I think her work, she's a double PhD. She found that there are 5 things that if you continually repeat these, you will build trust. Do you want me to share those?
Please.
We've talked about some of these already, but the first one, believe it or not, Renee, is transparency.
Right.
So if we think about trust as a vertical word, TRUST, the first T stands for transparency, telling the why behind the what. And I have a beautiful story if you want me to illustrate that.
Please.
Okay, so it's the pandemic, and there's a mom who comes on a Zoom call who's flustered and not doing well. She can't concentrate. And pretty soon she says, "Time out, Lyn. I need to go talk to my daughter. Can I take 5 minutes?" She leaves. She comes back and she says, "Okay, here's what happened. We've been talking about trust and transparency." And she said, "I had a big argument with my daughter over her pre-algebra assignment because she's home studying and we couldn't get the homework done. And I was frustrated. And I realized that when I left her, she's probably thinking that she's not very smart by what I said to her and how I treated her. But the truth is, I've forgotten pre-algebra and I am frustrated that I can't help her. So when I came on the call, it reminded me I wasn't transparent. I was just angry. And so she went back. She sat with her daughter for a few minutes and said, "It's not you, it's me. I can't remember. I feel like a dummy. Can we get a tutor and learn it together? I'll relearn, you learn." That was one of my favorite stories coming out of the pandemic about transparency.
Terrific. And the other four would be?
So that R is for respect. Talking with respect, treating people, the actions. How do we regard? Do you see other people as capable? So that's the R. The U is understanding, to stand under what Judith used to call the umbrella. It's as if we all come in with our own climate going on. Some of us have Care Bears, some of us have rain clouds, some of us have poo emojis, given the day or the mood, right? And understanding each other, getting into their world and figuring out where are they coming from today. The S is for success, mutual success. Can you have a win? Can I have a win? And are they both written in the same font? Not one is in caps and one is in lowercase, but can they both be win-wins or a three-way win? And then the last T is for tell the truth. Come back and just check any assumptions, make sure that we've got everything on the table before we move forward. You cycle through those 5 things consistently, you will build trust.
I think that's particularly key, not just for leaders, but perhaps for the entire organization as a whole, simply in that it would help bring about greater synergies if people are aligned in their purpose and motivations. Obviously, you go through uncovering some of the motivations, personal and otherwise, through this self-discovery journey. I'm curious, as a coach, would you recommend people help others discover their own motivations? Because there's a lot of psychographic tests and things of that nature, but not a lot of conversation around discovering motivations that allow people to perhaps perform better at a particular role as opposed to others.
No, I think motivation is huge. Of course, it's going to activate the gut brain. So that's a good thing if it's on. And when we understand our motivation, we can take that intention and see what kind of impact we had and measure the difference. So to me, motivation, the why behind the what, here we have Simon Sinek talking about, starting with your why. I think motivation is part of it for sure. How come? There must be a good reason. Doesn't mean the motivation will always stay static. It's probably pretty dynamic in nature, but when you know it, you can question how important it is. You can question how much speed, you can question a lot of things. And then that gives you guidance to move forward.
In a related thought, at least in my mind, is unpacking or assessing your self-leadership abilities or potential part of the conversation as well.
Yeah. Say more about what you want to discuss on that, because I think that's a fascinating place to go.
People often talk about leaders as being these individuals that lead an organization, but not too many people talk about their ability to lead themselves to a particular outcome or direction or purpose, and really being able to understand that, celebrate it even, and be willing to talk about it with others in order to find people of a like mind and of like values. That doesn't seem to happen too much, especially in the corporate space where people are generally after a job, trying to believe that the skill sets as usually assigned by university people is the way that they should progress.
So here's what I would add to what you've said. I feel if a leader is not continually learning and being challenged and evolving, they're going to get left behind. I think that period, exclamation mark, that's just what I've seen. And so I feel like leaders who are not coachable, it doesn't mean you have to have a coach all the time. But if you're going to the next level or you're heavily engaged in a very transitional season of your business's evolution, it behooves you to have people in your corner and to grow yourself. Otherwise, how are you going to know how to grow people? That's why I encourage people who are coaches to have a coach, to have a mentor, have a therapist. Make sure that you're being a product of the product Because if you're not growing, it's hard to make it through transition if you're not using some element of creativity, some element of learning, some element of risk, some ability to get out of your own navel lint and get perspective from other people and to persist, to use grit. Those 5 things generally come when somebody's in an evolutionary stage themselves or willing to not just sit on a throne and say, I'm at the highest rung of this corporation, but to keep expanding forward. So I think we're aligned in what we're saying, right?
And is there an element to mindfulness as well in this whole journey?
Yes.
I don't know if mindful leadership is the right term to use. If so, how would you define it?
I think it's mindfulness as a generic overarching umbrella term, but it can be all kinds of things. I will tell you that mental health, wellness, equilibrium, balance, meditation are all words that we frequently use with our clients here at SoulSalt. Because if your nervous system is not calm, if your nervous system is not in a position of being capable of having some kind of coherence, you're not going to function at your peak. And if you can't, and you're going to have upsets. So if you can self-regulate and get yourself into a position where you can be of your best mind, heart, and soul, you'll be a better leader. And it's becoming more and more a topic. Again, I've sat with the Thinkers 50, and Megan Wrights even teaches courses on this to executives about mindfulness. Dan Cable talks about it. Francesca Gino talks about it. It's a thing, and it's becoming more of a thing.
Right. In this journey, I'm aware that many of us struggle perhaps with conflicting voices, many of them inside our own head, some of which may be rabid supporters and fans of the direction that we're moving in, and others can be serious detractors. How do we pick the voices to listen to? Because sometimes detractors can be voices of caution as well. And at times, fans can be over-optimistic supporters. How do you find balance in this self-talk journey?
Right.
If I could put it that way.
It's a great question. I'm so glad you asked it. The research shows us that leaders generally have a bias toward listening to 5 people more than they listen to others. And it's typically the same 5 people. Now, that's not bad. However, like you said, sometimes it's the outlier or the radical thinker over here that gives us the question that helps us not go down something because of our bias. And so every leader would do well to broaden the number of people that they listen to and also understand their own personal decision-making and communication patterns. That's why we have the DISC, the DISC assessment. Like that's a huge tool. It's one of the most reliable and standardized tools in the coaching business, even more so than the Myers-Briggs. And so I think it behooves a leader to understand what is their style. Are they going to have a bias toward results? If that's the case, then they should slow down and talk to the people who are going to tell them how these quick decisions are going to affect individuals. Do they have a strong bias for slowing things down and always making sure that it's high quality? If they do, they might not be listening to the innovators who are thinking outside the box and coming up with these new inspirational ideas because they're so wedded to data and quality. So you can see we need to understand our style, find people who vary from it, and have more of a balanced scorecard in our decision-making. There's my opinion.
Certainly. And that sounds really good advice. So I'm curious, how would we go about intentionally creating an advisory board, if you will, to provide that level of input that we should be having in our lives?
Yeah, I think there's some literature out there. You can Google and find some really good ideas quickly. Some of the things I would think is you want to have people who will tell you the truth, people who are on your team but will tell you the truth. You don't necessarily need somebody who's going to tear you apart. You want people who are wanting you to succeed, but are not going to flatter you beyond reason. So you want people who are your fans who can be honest. You want people who are content experts or subject experts. Sometimes you want outside strategic eyes that can see you from a distance. And sometimes you want to pull people in and listen to them when they have nothing specialized in their mind. They may be on the janitorial staff. They might be somebody who is watching your front desk, who sees a different perspective, and they can give you an angle that you would not get otherwise.
Right. That would certainly make sense. And do we determine the frequency in which we often catch up and talk about things, or is there like a minimum frequency that of meeting with these five individuals that we should really incorporate into our calendars?
I think that's a good question too. And I can't say that I'm an expert, but I'll tell you what I see work in the trenches. There are certain meetings that you need to have, say with a board of advisors or your team, that you need to have consistently so that you can all stay on the same page and follow strategy. So that might be a weekly meeting to stay on track with strategy, and a monthly meeting to reiterate what is strategy, and an annual meeting or quarterly meetings to recalibrate strategy. So those should be consistent. There are also the one-to-ones where you want to sit with people who are working with you and see how they're aligning to all the things that you're doing. So I think it's a frequency of different sorts of meetings. And I think that it has to depend. Some people do really well with a team meeting once a week. Some do it every other week. The frequency probably depends upon the dynamic of your business, maybe the age of your business, and maybe also a composition of the individuals on the team.
Mm. And in a similar vein, I'm thinking about our abilities to perhaps use our imagination, cast a bit of a vision or a picture for not just the future that we would like to create, but also to address what if scenarios in our respective journeys. Do you find that comes easily to a lot of people, or are some people perhaps better at this than others? And for those of us, if that is the case, for those of us who are not so good at it, who or what should we be looking for in terms to bring that into our personal mental thought process, if I
Yeah.
put it that way?
Well, if we follow the DISC model, there are four main styles. Usually it's the individual who's in the high I that can play that role, that can ask those questions, that can brainstorm like crazy, that can innovate and channel new ideas.
Mhm.
It's nice to have somebody like that on the team, yes. And so identifying that individual and letting them know what their role is. Beyond that, I think it's also important to sometimes move the environment that you're in when you're discussing these things. Because again, there's also research that shows us that our environment influences our thinking and our performance. So every once in a while, that's why they're getting off site and having new conversations. So it could be an individual, it can be a facilitator that you bring in. It could also be putting your team in a different place. And there's a whole body of knowledge around red teaming, which I'm fascinated with on some level, about bringing in that one person who's going to ask the disruptive question. This is, okay, we know this and this, and so we're going here. And they ask that one question, it makes you stop and go, what? Oh, wait a second. And again, maybe you have to recalibrate. So did I answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. Having those different perspectives is certainly key, would be my takeaway. Actively seeking them to and encourage them to bring up their thoughts and perspectives would certainly be very helpful. And listening to you so far, what was something that I'm thinking of, be a takeaway, is that purpose-driven brands certainly have a competitive advantage in today's business world. And to allow for that, we really need to be purpose-driven individuals and leaders.
Yeah.
Would that be a fair takeaway?
I think so. I don't know that everybody's motivated by that. However, the upcoming generations of leaders are, and some of the top leaders now are. And we're finding more and more that one of the things we're hungry for is meaning and purpose. And so you see that brands that are most attractive are those that are in touch with that. And they're encouraging individuals' dreams and individuals who have a meaning driven life. And they're using words and language, and they're using business practices that make a difference as much as maybe they make a profit.
This has been a fascinating conversation, and well, mine's going off in different directions. Lots of questions popping up and thoughts. But to bring things to a close, Lyn, are there perhaps a couple of areas around this idea of finding purpose and building decisiveness in our leadership but you find doesn't get talked about very much, doesn't get much airtime. So what would they be?
Gosh, ask that question in a little bit different way because I think I'm circling on a answer, but ask it in a little different way.
Sure. Yeah. Well, what are the aspects to purpose-driven leadership, if you will, but doesn't get talked about very, be it self-leadership
Yeah, I could.
together, acclaimed.
Yeah, I'm glad I had you restate that because where my mind went first was the more lofty corporate kind of thing. But honestly, now that you stated it that way, I feel like it comes back to knowing your personal core values, leading your life from that piece of your soul salt, letting other people attached to the business because their core values match some kind of thread that's running through the operations of what you do and the functions, and unite around something that comes from the salt of the soul for each individual and collectively for the company or the organization.
And you talked about core values and said that you help people unpack their core values in a different way. Could you give us a bit of a teaser as to what people might expect if they were to give you a call or read your book?
Yeah. So in the core values exercise in particular, it's like taking a pile of sand and sending it through, say, a sieve and seeing what comes out that's refined, and then putting it through maybe a cheesecloth and see what's coming through. And then take that and let it sit in some water and see what the sediment brings to the top and goes to the bottom on the sediment. It's a refining process that most people haven't stopped and gone through and sifted and been questioned. It's like the process we've talked about today. Look at it from a different direction, come at it from another direction, shake it out a little bit, add something, take away something. And when you finish, you have something that you go, all right, that's me right there. That's my plumb line. That's what runs through me from the head up here in the top of my head to my toes. That's what they get with that first exercise I give you in chapter 3.
Brilliant. To wrap things up, Lyn, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
And I have listened to you and I. Number one, I love the way you interview. This is the second time we've had a chance to talk. The first time we've had a chance for the interview. And what you're doing on your podcast is exactly what I think is needed. So my takeaway is you're a passionate human being who's following purpose. You're asking critical questions. You're looking for your truth. You're looking for things that individuals can hang on to if it's true for them. We're not pounding a book over anybody's head and saying, here's the 5 rules of everyone's life. And I like that you can pose questions, bring topics, and allow people to get that nugget that they need when they need it. And it's researched, it's relevant, and it's timely.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Lyn, you've got a little bit of a gift for listeners. It's a handout. Could you tell us a bit more about it? And we'll include a link to that.
Yeah, it's a 1-page guide. Yeah, thank you. It's 1-page guide, and it's strategies to be your authentic self, which is maybe if you summed everything up we talked about, I think what we're talking about is find your truth and live it. Be your true self. And so this would be 7 points to do that.
Brilliant. Like I said, we'll have a link to that in show notes. When your book is available on Amazon and other major retailers, I would assume.
Yes.
Yeah. Excellent. So we'll include a link to that as well if people would like to get a copy. And if listeners are curious, want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
We all think soul salt out at soulsalt.com. We have a great blog with lots of free guides and information. You can follow us on Instagram. I'm right now personally posting there. We'll have a social media coordinator doing that, but right now I'm taking a stint at it. So Instagram, Soul Salt Inc. or soulsalt.com.
Excellent. We'll include links to that in the show notes. Lyn, this has been fabulous. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.